Hey everyone, I hope you're all well and enjoying the beautiful weather in Austin. My apologies for not making it in person this year. I want to start out by saying a few things about natalism generally, as a concept. First, this is an idea whose time has come. Everything from automation and the future of work to the aging of all developed industrializing populations, regardless of size, points to an uncomfortable fact. Almost no modern nation of people has enough of the right people, meaning those who are young enough, prepared enough, and capable enough to sustain their national future. There are many contours to this problem: our nutrition and endocrine disrupted environments, the mass migration of foreign populations, the state of developing versus developed countries, the labor capital misfit and political gender divide. But broadly speaking, it's now common knowledge that something is wrong, and it's suppressing the species' reproduction almost everywhere. Second, there are intellectually unimpressive, tendentious readers of your motives you'll just have to deal with. The nebbish protesters outside, the unflattering and false media coverage, and even some punching right from those who think you're not serious enough about truer demographic and HBD perspectives. All of these people are the noise that Signal attracts. Wish them well, and make use of the new audiences they bring you. Third, there are advances in automation and human robotics that some might say render the wisdom of prioritizing family formation unimportant. I don't think this is true. It might happily alleviate the political pressures for mass migration to shore up workforce gaps, but I don't think the human sense of meaning from enjoying one's family will be displaced anytime soon. All that said, what do I want to talk about? I would phrase it this way: our time is limited and we have to use it well. There are different limits. There are limits for men and women. There are limits for children, young adults, the middle aged, and the elderly. There are limits for experience, both when they can be had and how many can be had. It's not fair that life is so short and bounded in different ways for different people, but it is, and not accepting that only causes more pain. To me, these limits imply broadly that we have to prioritize the young over the old, and make sure these limitations are incorporated into how we raise them. I think the core limitation is gamete quality and mutual attractiveness by sex with age. I'll say that again because it's a weird sentence. I think the core limitation on human fertility is a combination of both gamete quality and the mutual attractiveness of each sex declining with age. Let's look more concretely. Here's the relative realized fertility of men and women as time goes on. In 2021, the New York Times published an astonishing article indicating that not only did female physicians have twice the infertility rate of the general population due to work stressors, but many female physicians, women with undergraduate degrees in the sciences, medical schooling, residencies, even specialties related to gynecological development and childbirth, were largely unaware of the limitations of female fertility with age. The populace writ large, surely much less. What does the dramatic fall after age 30 come from? Ovarian reserve is approximately 90% exhausted by the age of 30, and genetic quality begins to deteriorate rapidly thereafter. What does this imply about our modern educational programs after the age of 18, which take most women until the middle 30s to become established enough to entertain the idea of marriage and children? Sperm also age, but the SNPs that men suffer in their genetic material are not as concentrated. For example, Barron Trump was conceived by a 60-year-old father. We simply do not see this occur with women. Here are men's ages and the ages of women they say look best versus women. This OkCupid data, collected over nearly a decade, lines up with common human experience. What does this imply about the willingness to marry and the seriousness with which relationships headed towards marriage will be pursued by either sex as time goes on? Maybe we could hope that unattached, marriageable men suddenly start desiring women in their 30s and 40s just as much as they do in their 20s, but we may as well hope for the same shared fertility. Here's another limitation. Though the ever longer delays in prioritizing marriage which women undergo are motivated by pursuit of higher education and thus greater economic remuneration, their nature means they still look out for men who earn more than they do as marriage partners. There are well-studied analogies to this, by the way, with relative height and relative age, which are somewhat less mutable. What does this imply about a program of life where since the 1980s, more women than men have enrolled in college, and a workforce where college-educated young women now outpace men in cities in earnings until their 30s? When you put all of these things together, what's implied is that we cannot actually expect and demand equivalent participation in the same spheres of life between men and women from men and women. That is, putting them in competition with one another from their late teens through their early 30s, and still expecting that marriage and children will result is a fool's errand. This is why, despite financial incentives, Hungary, South Korea, and a few other countries which have tried to buy the fertility of what are now established economic rivals have not been successful. You cannot buy a loss of what by then is a loss of freedom at 28 to encourage what should have been the start of a life together at 18. There are many more graphs and charts about other biological and sociological realities I could assail you with. The rivalrous male and female attraction to height, the changed BMIs of men and women over the last 50 years, the number of premarital sexual partners and marital dissolution rates, the so-called teen birth rate, which is really the birth rate of 18 and 19-year-old mothers, versus the average marriage ages of society until recently, which is about 21. We could even look at life outcomes relative to the number and support of surviving grandparents who don't live forever, no matter how healthy and young we are. Our time is limited. What I think this all implies, though, is that those of you who are parents of young children are the second most important people on earth, and the most important people on earth are your children. I think those of us in an advanced state of decay without children must matter much less. Though those of you who are exceptional on one axis or another, I'm not too worried about. I think you'll figure things out. That is to say, making sure 20-year-olds turn into married parents by 30 is vastly more important than trying to fix 30-year-olds. And making sure 10-year-olds grow up into 20-year-old adults who will make good choices is infinitely more important. I think we need to basically abandon attempts to course correct or provide for people after 30, perhaps even a little bit earlier. In about as much time as Trump announced his first presidential run to today, today's 10-year-olds will be 20-year-olds. Today's 20-year-olds will be 30-year-olds. 30-year-olds in the audience, I think you know where I'm going with this. We're all running out of time, and we have to use it well. What does it look like to make sure our future young men and women are seriously invested in their marriageability? What does marriageability look like for men and women if they're getting married and living successful lives starting at 20 instead of 30 or 40? It's not the same for men and women, so the program of life won't be the same for boys and girls. This is something you'll have to discuss with spouses, friends, and community leaders because the broader culture is uninterested in that level of honesty. I've spoken long enough now. Again, I hope you're all well, enjoying the sunshine and great food in Austin, and you have a productive weekend. I'll see you guys on X.